I do remember the first discovery, and I do remember the first species I described, and those are two different examples, sort of parallel in the time frame. And I'll give both examples to you. So when I was an undergrad student in Brazil, I set out a field site that I wanted to study, and we put out some traps, so pitfall traps, which are these buckets in the ground, and animals move around, and then they fall in this bucket, and then we can check the next day and see what fell in that trap. So I remember clearly the day where I checked one of these traps, and I found a very small, tiny frog in one of these traps. And immediately I said, This is something special." I didn't know it was a new species, but I knew it was interesting because I've never seen it in the literature or the field guides. So I brought that to a specialist, and he said, "This is 100% a new species." But it turns out it was so different from everything else that it took us a while to describe it and formally name it, because we have to do a lot of studies to figure out where to put it in, let's say, the tree of life. So we had to do a lot of detailed anatomical and genetic studies. So that description took, let's say, I found the first one in 2005, 2006, and the species was only named in 2012, which is like roughly 6 years after that. Which brings me to an important issue, is that the time between discovery and description usually varies a little bit, and the average time is 20 years. So that was 6 years, so it didn't take as much time. So that was my first discovery. But the first species I actually got to name was a species I found in my first field trip in the Amazon. It's a larger big frog, and I knew the group fairly well. And I thought, oh, in the field, we thought, oh, this is almost certainly a new species. And that description was a lot faster. From discovery to description, it took less than a year, and that was pretty special. But I still think the first discovery that I did when I was an undergrad was the most relevant and maybe career changing discovery for me. It was the big wow, we can still discover things. And that was like, that probably hooked me into being a scientist and an amphibian biologist and taxonomist and all of that. Well, when we're coming up with a name, we think about several things. A new name can be pretty much anything. It could be a characteristic of the animal, it could be the name of the locality, it could be a name of a legend or a myth. And it's really like a creative time when you come up with names. So I usually try to be think a little bit outside the box. I rarely use, let's say, a characteristic to just name the species. I usually tend to use local legends or the name of the locality, and I've given names to people that I really admire in science. So I did name a species after my master's in advisor. I did name another species after a guy that, when I was in the museum, this guy gave me a jar and said, "Look, I'm pretty sure this is a new species. I don't have time to work on it. Name it, describe it." So I name it after him because he gifted me that paper and that description. So I gifted him the name of that species. So it's usually a process. It sometimes involves more than one people. So you have to like choose together and come up with a name that everybody's happy about, because we usually have co-authors and collaborators doing these descriptions. It's a long and probably the most fun process in describing a species is actually selecting a name, because it's like naming. Yeah, I don't want to say it's like naming a child, but it's like it's a name that you're going to put there and it's going to be there forever. It's not going to change ever. So it's a really big important thing in amphibian biology.